It's time once again for Preservation Oaks, completely reliable history, where every fact has been carefully researched, thoroughly verified, and approved by absolutely nobody. Well now, here's a story from American history.
There's the story about Great Aunt Hilda. She was the first woman in the county to drive an automobile. That's because she stole the sheriff's Model T to chase a raccoon she was convinced was her reincarnated husband. The sheriff was furious. The raccoon was reportedly flattered.
If you'd like to send in your own completely reliable history story, email us at preservationoaks@gmail.com. If we use your story on the program, we'll be sure to give you credit. And now, here's the actual episode.
Welcome to Preservation Oaks, the podcast where we invite you to step away from the bustle of everyday life, settle in and relax, and take a moment to leave the familiar behind as we explore the hidden gems of America that preserve our cultural past. We call them our Preservation Oaks. And with each episode, we'll journey to a different corner of the country, where we'll discover the unique histories, landscapes, and communities that make up our nation. We'll visit with local museums, historical and genealogical societies. They are the stewards of these stories. They preserve the legacy of each place like precious pieces of fabric in a quilt that binds the freedom-loving, hardworking people in this country together. So, slow down, grab a beverage, open your mind, and let us take you on a tour of the fascinating histories and heartfelt traditions that lie just beyond the horizon. This is Preservation Oaks, where every story is a stitch in the fabric of our shared culture. Now, join our host, Sean Radcliff, as he uncovers another thread in the tapestry of America's heritage and what it takes to preserve it.
Hello, welcome to Preservation Oaks. I'm Sean Radcliff in Salt Lake City, where wildfires in the mountains have turned sunny skies into a smoke-filled haze for many Utah residents. Today, we have a very special guest joining us. Our conversation takes us beyond the story of any single museum, genealogy, or historical society, archive, or preservation organization, and into the broader world of how local history is supported, encouraged, and preserved across the United States. For generations, thousands of dedicated people have worked to safeguard the stories of their unique areas of our country. These organizations preserve the documents, artifacts, buildings, traditions, and memories that might otherwise be lost to time. But behind many of those efforts stands a larger network of support, training, advocacy, and professional development. That brings us to today's guest. Joining us is John Dichtl, President and CEO of the American Association for State and Local History, often known simply as AASLH. Founded in 1940, AASLH serves history organizations and professionals throughout the United States and beyond, helping strengthen the institutions that preserve our shared heritage and connect communities with their past. Whether you're a museum volunteer, a historical society member, a genealogist, preservation advocate, or simply someone who enjoys learning about the places and people that came before us, today's conversation offers a fascinating look at the work being done behind the scenes to keep local history alive, and especially the newly announced History and Democracy Initiative. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of our listeners in the United States and around the world for your support of Preservation Oaks. If you enjoy the program, please consider liking, following, subscribing, sharing, and leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Preservation Oaks is available through all major podcast directories and platforms. If you're interested in being a guest on our program, or if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email us at preservationoaks@gmail.com. And now, this is Preservation Oaks Podcast, episode 127, Let's see what we can learn today. Welcome to the program, John, and thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, happy to be here, Sean.
First off, I'd like to thank you and AASLH for all the work you did to help facilitate the America 250 celebrations, the public awareness, educational events, and information. That was great work. Thank you.
Yeah, we were excited to do it and just excited to see the impact that it's had.
John, before we dive into AASLH, can you tell our listeners a little about your own journey? What drew you into the world of public history?
Yeah, well, I've always been interested in history. I was a history major, but didn't know what to do with it. I have done some teaching. I liked the thought of teaching, but didn't want to make that a career. And then I discovered history museums and public history and found my way into that field. And yeah, that's just mainly stumbled into it, I think.
Well, we're glad you did. Was there a defining moment or experience that made you realize history would be your life's work?
Well, I did major in history, so I suspected it would be important, but it wasn't. It was really two things. It was after I graduated from college, getting a chance to travel to some other countries, and I kept meeting other young people who were traveling as well, and they all seemed to know so much about their countries, and they knew a lot about the United States, and it just made me realize there were a lot of things I didn't know about my own country. And that helped kind of pique my historical interest in a different way. So that was part. And then the other thing was that I ended up in Washington, D.C. for a few years, thinking that I wanted to be a lawyer and work in the legal world, and ultimately decided not to do that. But just realizing how much of Washington, D.C. and how much of our country's government, that you really have to have a historical understanding of the country to understand the structures of law, the structures of government. So that was the other thing that pushed me.
I think there's a lot of folks of all ages really that are in that same boat where, they don't really understand everything they need to understand. And that's where your work comes in. You work with institutions across the country. What continues to inspire you about local and state history today?
Yeah, I think one of the most exciting things for me is just the incredible variety. And, just speaking as we were a couple seconds ago about how people come to history, sometimes as a profession or sometimes as a hobby, more, just an interest. The answer is people come from all different directions. And one of the things I love about public history and museums and historical societies, I'll borrow a phrase from a colleague who said, public history has porous edges. People come to it for all different kinds of reasons. So you get people from other, if you're a scholar working in public history, you might brush up against archaeologists or geographers or folklorists, so there's other disciplines, different kinds of institutions, but just people with different backgrounds come to it, all different kinds of ages, races, genders, religions, different parts of the country, different points in their life, and public history in particular, the kinds of small history institutions that I think you and I are going to be talking about today. People end up on, volunteering in those organizations, serving on the board or staffing those organizations, maybe as a second, third, fourth, or 20th career in their life. And as I said, maybe it starts as a passion or it continues to be a passion or it's a service to the community, but at some point it becomes work, public history work. And some people have training in it. Some people have graduate degrees in it. Some people just pick it up as they go and learn, hopefully, from organizations like my organization.
Yeah, I've met a lot of those people, and I've met people on the spectrum of history, like you just suggested, where there's some people that have been in their communities and they just happen to love the local historical society. They have no formal training and they go into it, and they've been doing it for years successfully. And then there's other people that have a lot of training. And I love them all, actually.
Yeah, and we, here at my office, I guess where I'm sitting, surrounded by some other staff members, most of whom have some kind of training in history or museums, we realize that a lot of the people we're working with don't necessarily have that training, and we continue to learn from them, and so do the other members of the organization, whether they have training or not. Everyone's learning from each other, and we're learning by doing and sharing great examples of how to meet challenges and how to present history to the public and do that in really exciting ways. And so that's another thing that I think inspires me about this work is just the creativity and the passion that so many different kinds of people bring to it.
Well, I really respect your work, and I really respect AASLH. For listeners who may not be familiar, what is the American Association for State and Local History, and who does it serve?
Well, it's a national association, a membership association for individuals and for organizations that are doing history, whether it's history museums, historical societies, historic sites and parks, and related organizations. So we kind of act as a professional association and a trade association, helping the history community to thrive in its work and to tell a shared history to which everyone can belong, wherever you are, whether it's Utah or here in Tennessee or in Massachusetts or in New York City, telling a story, telling history that involves everyone and is open to everyone.
Yeah, you guys do great work. AASLH has been around since 1940. What was the original purpose of the organization, and how has that mission evolved over time?
Yeah, so we were founded as a nonprofit in 1940, but our roots go back to the beginning of the century, about 1904. We were a conference of state history organizations within the American Historical Association, which continues to exist today. And then we broke away in 1940 to become a separate group. And it was really a group of state leaders, state archivists and state historical society leaders who wanted to, help each other, but also help smaller institutions all over the country. So that's been our purpose. It remains our purpose. I think one of the ways in which we've evolved is the field has evolved. So back in 1940, when we first got started, in our very first newsletter, very first article, or not article, I guess, letter from the president of the organization, talked about how there were more than 1,000 organizations today in the field of state and local history. And, here we are, 86 years later, and we know that it's more like 21,000 history organizations in the country. So just the sheer number of organizations has grown, but also there never used to be specialized training for people working in history museums or historical societies, and now there is. There's a field called museum studies, and people get degrees in museum studies in many universities across the country. And then there's also the field of public history, which is a subfield of U.S. history. And there's about 150, 170 master's programs in public history around the country. So none of that framework existed back in 1940. And so some of the work or some of the services, resources we were providing back then, maybe now provided by those graduate programs. So we've evolved to do other things and fill other gaps.
Thank you for that. Today, I read that AASLH describes itself as providing leadership, resources, and advocacy for the history community. What does that look like in practical day-to-day terms?
Well, it looks like a lot of different things that we do. We have about 24 committees at any one time that are made up of people from all across the United States. Those committees help us stay aware of what's happening and whatever the kind of issue area is for that committee. In some cases, those committees are also producing reports and digging into questions and creating resources that we can use to turn around and deliver to the rest of the field. So we have lots of committees working on things. We have a staff here also working with those committees and creating materials and publications and working with authors on publications. We also engage in research on the field of public history and museums so that, as a national association, we really want to make sure that we know and our members know what the new developments are, where trends are heading. So I mentioned the 21,000 history organizations. We did a census survey a few years ago and actually counted the number of history organizations in the country.
Yeah.
So, that our work looks like the work of a lot of people working together and in a lot of different formats. So we do magazine articles, we have technical leaflets, we publish books, we do webinars, we do big conferences, we do small conferences and symposiums, lots of very specialized, focused materials for people to kind of really get at their need and serve them in a very kind of sharp, precise way, but also lots of general stuff that people can participate in if they're not quite sure what they want or need. And so I guess that's what it looks like.
I'm just astonished by the level of resources and commitment that is on your website, just shown there. It's just amazing the work you guys are doing. John, how would you describe the role AASLH plays as a national hub for history organizations across the country?
Yeah, we really see ourselves as a connector and a unifier. Sometimes in the past, we've talked about being the voice for state and local organizations, kind of a national voice, but it's more than that. It's being a central connector to link together thousands of individuals, hundreds, maybe thousands of history organizations, so that they can, speak through us to have a national voice, but also to speak to each other, because that's the real power of this organization, or probably any good organization, is the many individuals who are involved and learning from each other. So oftentimes we just try and get out of the way and let members and other people, whether or not they're members, just who are coming to use our resources, we try and get out of the way and let them learn from each other. So we tend to try and find good examples of institutions with problems that have worked through those problems, and we try and share those solutions with everyone. And it's not something that me and my staff have figured out. It's these institutions themselves have figured it out. And so we're just simply trying to share that with other people. So I think that's what we mean by being a hub.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, that's a great strategy. Your mission emphasizes helping the history community thrive and telling a shared history in which everyone belongs. What does that mean in practice for local organizations?
Well, I think of thriving organizations as organizations that are doing multiple things really quite well. And so helping the history community to thrive is just helping people to see the different ways in which they can be successful. So you can be successful with the number of visitors you get. You can be successful or thrive, financially, making money on programs, making money on visitors coming to see your museum or historical society. You can have great relationships in the community. You can have great relationships with teachers and with students who for whom your institution is just a really vital part of their education. So there's lots of ways to thrive, but to really kind of thrive in the way we mean it is to, I think, do multiple of those at once and help organizations see that, doing one better can help you do the next one better. And then, the idea of belonging, that and history organizations, part of its mission or part of its function in a community is to help everyone feel that sense of belonging. I think that there are some ways that historical organizations sometimes can feel exclusive or off-putting, like they're somehow trying to preserve a past that belonged to someone else and is not really open to new people or, new members of the community, or to young people, or they're just trying to hold on to nostalgia. But I think most history organizations do a really good job of using the history of the community and using the space and facilities and resources of their history organization to welcome people in and really send the message that this community and its past belong to everyone who lives here, and in some ways belong to and is inviting to anyone who visits, and anyone who's interested in it, it belongs to you too. So I think that's what it means to share history in a way that helps organizations to thrive and builds a sense of belonging in communities.
I've noticed that too in my work, that most of the organizations that are actually what I would call thriving are outgoing and do that really well. They welcome everybody and share with everybody.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Now, John, why is it so important right now that communities preserve and tell their local stories?
Well, I think like everything local, it can be in danger of being overwhelmed by the national and, giant corporations and giant media outlets and the internet. Like, these are all things that are, great. They've arguably made life better, but they can be, they can squash and erase and cover up what's unique about the local. And so it's really important to hold on to that, and no one does that better than local history organizations. That's kind of their whole purpose, to hold on to that, to preserve it, to accentuate it, and to share it, what's unique and special about a community. And it's so, there's just a lot of pressure working in the other direction of, people go home and turn on their computer or their television set and they're watching something happening. They're watching national news about things happening in other countries or in other parts of the United States. Local media is dying out, and so there's just more and more attention is being turned to kind of national issues and celebrities and sports in a way that draws attention away from what's unique and special about communities. And so that, I think that work just becomes so much more important for museums and historical societies to be preserving that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Local media is dying out.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point you made. Now, many of the organizations you serve are small or volunteer run, as you mentioned. What are the biggest challenges they're facing today?
I think always the biggest challenge we hear is funding, whether it's a nonprofit or a small museum that's part of a town or county government or state government, even larger museums. It's all, funding is a problem. And, particularly volunteer run organizations struggle with that. They tend not to have the guaranteed funding that comes from a state or a government institution, although they often have great relationships with local government. There's also a generational shift happening in which, and this is a problem for all nonprofits, not just history and museum nonprofits, but there's an older generation, baby boomers and previous generations that have volunteered at very high levels. And often, you look at a small history organization and the entire board is people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, maybe 90s.
Right.
And it's not clear that there's another generation coming up behind them to take those spots. And so that's kind of a system-wide generational shift that we're seeing and don't really have answers to. And then also, I think many smaller history organizations really struggle with the functions of museums and museum collections and archives and taking care of records. The kind of really, it can be very technical to do it correctly. Make sure, kept things at a decent temperature and right amount of humidity and, dealing with fire prevention and then being able to know what's in your collection and be able to access it, whether you have a digital database. And just all of that kind of technical work can be a real challenge for smaller organizations. They may have a system that they've used that's been handed down to whoever is running it now, but is that necessarily the best system? And, I was talking a while ago about training that's offered in museum studies and public history programs. And, not every history organization has someone involved who has that training. So I think that can be a big struggle, along with funding, along with knowing where your volunteers are coming from, just doing the work of being a historical organization that has a collection of things, whether it's paper records or photographs or artifacts, objects. Those are all very difficult to take care of, and they cost a relatively large amount of money to take care of things like that and store them. So I think that's just another big challenge.
The best one that I heard in dealing with youth was an organization in Michigan, I believe. And what they did, and they're the only ones that I've run into that did this, they brought all the children in certain grade levels into the local cemetery. Number one, they cleaned up the cemetery, but number two, they asked them to pick out a grave of either one of their relatives that was buried there or just someone, that they liked the gravestone or whatever, and then do a research report on that person. And that really fostered a sense of community within those children. And I haven't seen anyone else doing that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, there's some very innovative youth programs and school programs. And for listeners who are interested, a great resource is the organization Made by Us like US, United States, but Made by Us. It's a group that was created by several large museums about 8 or 9 years ago, trying to kind of get ready for the 250th anniversary of the country. And they figured out that the single most important thing they could do as a kind of a coalition of these large museums was to focus on the youth question of like, what can we do? What kind of research can we do? What kind of resources can we offer and examples can we give so that more history organizations do a better job of connecting to young people in their communities? And so there's a terrific website with lots of resources on it. So it's Made by Us.
Oh, cool. Madebyus.org?
Yes.
Yeah, cool. I'll go and look at it. Thank you. From your perspective, John, what happens if we don't preserve local history now?
It disappears, and it disappears forever. You can't recreate, written documents or artifacts that disappear if no one's taking care of them. Yeah, you also kind of lose I think you lose a valuable part of the community, what makes it special, what makes it interesting and different than the next small town down the road or the next suburb on the other side of town. Like what makes your neighborhood interesting and makes it a special place to live, that all can be lost. And you also lose, there are individuals in the community who have their own personal experience and memory that in many institutions or many cases are connected to local history institutions. And if those kind of relationships aren't taken care of, those people go away and eventually pass on without having left their memory added to the history of the community. And oftentimes it's very valuable information. So if you don't take care of it, it's gone forever.
Yeah.
And you just lose the special identity of the community.
Yeah, I agree with you. Now, listeners, I'd like to provide you with the contact information for AASLH. Their website is aaslh.org. You can phone them at 615-320-3203. If you want to email Dichtl, that's Dichtl at aaslh.org. Their address is 404 BNA Drive, Suite 105, Nashville, Tennessee, 37217. And if you want to find them on Facebook, just search for AASLH. That all sound right, John?
It sure does.
John, who should consider becoming a member of AASLH? Individuals, organizations, or both?
Well, we have both, and we welcome both. It's one of the things that makes us a little different than a lot of the other associations that we work with in the museum and history fields. And there's a lot of associations, but we're a little bit unique in that we're both a professional association, which means we focus on individuals, and a trade association, meaning we also focus on organizations. So we definitely have room for both.
Okay, cool. How much is a membership, and what are some of the most valuable benefits members receive?
Yeah, our basic individual membership is $80 for the year, $45 for someone who's retired, and for students, it's $30. Our dues rate is about to increase, so some of these numbers are about to go up. We haven't changed to cover inflation in a while, so we're getting ready to do that, but it won't go up much from this. A basic institutional membership for a small institution, and we peg all of these on the budget size of an institution, so it's kind of a progressive due system. So for the smallest organizations, $50,000 or less in annual budget, it's $98 a year. For organizations that are $50,000 to $250,000 in budget, it's $118, and then it goes on up from that. Our benefits are a variety of kind of hard and soft benefits. So hard things like actual discounts on special services. One of the kind of most popular categories of services or benefits are 20% discount on collection management software. So Past Perfect, Catalog It, and Collector Systems are three companies that offer really great digital web-based collections management systems, which pretty much every history organization needs. So you can get a 20% discount by being a member of ASLH. But we also have a news magazine, History News, comes out 4 times a year. Great articles and pieces about what history organizations are doing all over the country and how they're approaching all kinds of issues and problems and challenges. Lots of new ideas in the magazine. We have technical leaflets that come out 4 times a year as well that are very clear and succinct how-to guides telling you how to do certain things that museums and historical organizations need to do, everything from fundraising to managing a collection to dealing with archives to putting together tours or exhibits or doing advocacy work, speaking up for your organization with local government or state legislature. We provide information on all of that. There's also a variety of other discounts on all of our professional development. So webinars, courses, online courses, workshops, huge variety of that. And there's discounts on all of that for members. Plus, we also offer group rates on different kinds of insurance, everything from life insurance to professional insurance to car insurance, health insurance, thanks to a coalition that our organization belongs to with a large number of other education institutions, educational associations.
Man, nice benefits. Also, your membership rates for both individual and institutions are quite reasonable. Very nice.
Okay.
Thank you for that. I'm going to go to a break, John, because we're out of time for this segment. Listeners, we'll be right back after an important message about joining this marvelous national organization.
Across America, thousands of people are working every day to preserve the stories that make their communities unique. They are museum volunteers, archivists, genealogists, educators, preservationists, historical society members, students, and lifelong learners. Some work in large institutions. Others serve in small organizations, run entirely by volunteers, but all share a common purpose: preserving the history that helps us understand who we are and where we came from. The American Association for State and Local History, known as AASLH, brings these people together. By becoming a member of AASLH, you join a nationwide community dedicated to preserving and sharing local history. Membership provides access to valuable resources, educational opportunities, publications, networking, and professional support designed to help history organizations and history enthusiasts succeed. Whether you're serving on the board of a local historical society, volunteering at a museum, managing an archive, researching family history, or simply passionate about preserving the past, AASLH offers tools and connections that can help strengthen your efforts. Membership also helps support the broader mission of preserving America's stories, from small towns and rural communities to major cities and historic sites across the nation. Every artifact preserved, every historic building protected, every document saved, and every story shared helps ensure that future generations can learn from the past.
If local history matters to you, consider becoming a member of AASLH. To learn more, visit aaslh.org. That's aaslh.org. Join the community that helps preserve America's history, one story, one place, and one generation at a time.
Welcome to the Genealogy Lab, where curiosity meets discovery. Here's professional genealogist Diana Chrisman-Smith, a seasoned explorer of family histories, uncovering the evidence that connects us across generations. Diana opens the lab doors, and inside her lab, she'll share quick tips, cool discoveries, and smart tools to help you map out your roots like a pro. So, grab your notebooks. It's time to enhance your research with this segment of the Genealogy Lab.
Welcome to the Genealogy Lab. Pull up a chair and join me for a bit of curiosity and discovery. Most countries have some sort of enumeration of citizens. In many places, such as the United States and Canada, there are also periodic enumerations by county, sometimes even by city or town. So who cares? Well, I think all family historians should care. There's so much we can glean from these records to get our ancestors in sync with each other and their world. Several points to remember when using census records. First and foremost, don't believe everything you read. Find other sources to verify, but the census can be a wonderful hint to names, family members, locations, and more. How reliable the information is depends on who gave the information, as well as how accurate and careful the enumerator, also known as census taker, was. Look carefully at the information for each person, if the whole household is listed, and compare to what else you know. If you have trouble reading the handwriting, look at other households taken by the same enumerator. Find similarities in how certain letters are formed by looking at the context of each word. Each census in each location in each year may be different. The questions often vary over time. The procedures change, boundaries change, street names may even change. In the U.S., the census is taken every 10 years on the 0 year, since 1790. These are maintained by the National Archives. However, much of the 1890 census was destroyed by a fire before it had been digitized or copied. So when searching for some areas, it will not be found. Of course, these are the places my family lived in. Other locations may have similar situations. Some countries take at different or inconsistent time periods. For example, Canada and the UK take theirs mainly in the years ending in 1. Most of the Danish censuses I use are in the 1s, but not all of them. Sometimes they're in some other random year. When you start working on an area, use the Family Search Wiki to find what years they took the census, what the rules were, where they're stored, and anything else mentioned. Be sure to check for all jurisdictions in which they may have lived. Do this for the country, the state, and the county, or comparable levels for your area. Keep this list as you research others there. I have a notebook with census notes such as the headings for each census year for each country, any state censuses with years and headings, and random notes to make my research easier. One of the notes is that in the U.S., censuses are not released to the public for 72 years. As I start researching a person, I try to find birth, marriage, and death records. Then the next record set I look for is the census. I list every year that I expect to find that person in my research record to fill in as it is located. I include all the federal and state or local censuses that were taken in their area during their lifetime. For example, Iowa took a state decennial census, that's every 10 years, on the 5s. Ones from 1925 are particularly outstanding, with the line for each person extending across 6 large sheets, and every household member is listed. So much information. I make sure to look for all my Iowa ancestors in every census, but especially if they were alive in 1925. Making this to-do list as I start provides an easy checklist for any gaps of missing records. Also, be sure you read every column for every person and make notes. And I'm not saying every column from the abstract from the original. I transcribe it into my database. If you find a different occupation than the one in the previous census, for example, that's a big clue. So make sure you read every column all the way across. Also look for the non-population schedules. There may be a farm schedule or a manufacturing schedule showing what they produced. Some years, the U.S. also had a mortality schedule showing deaths during the previous 12 months. All of these are useful in piecing together the lives of the family. For more information on using census records, here are some sources I find very helpful. Cindy's List. She has a broad category for census worldwide, which is then broken down into more topics with hidden nuggets in them, so browse. FamilySearch.org has their research wiki. Look at the location of interest. Browse for more links, such as specific pages for each census year for the location. The National Archives has free charts and forms regarding the U.S. Census at archives.gov/research/census. Their main page has an introduction to U.S. Census records and links to lots of AIDS forms and other links. You can also search these census records online at NARA for free. The National Archives also has a collection of the enumerator's instructions for the various years, which I find very helpful in understanding what was meant by the information collected. William Dollar Hyde has a number of books related to census, including his wonderful map guide to the U.S. federal censuses, 1790 to 1920, which shows the counties and boundary changes over time. This is a great help. And don't forget to Google census for the location you want to find more online. I also use this term on YouTube to find videos, including many by well-known organizations and genealogists. Also search for census reference books to see titles available from various suppliers. Heritage Books and Genealogical Publishing Company each have over 100 different census titles, including abstracts from individual counties or non-population censuses, also such as a state or county or an 1890 census substitute or a specific group for one census. There are also records from all over the world. Browse to see what's relevant for you. I love the census and consider it one of the best starting points for hints for where to look next. But remember to check everything. Since it's not perfect, there are errors and discrepancies, but it is well worth the effort. That's it for today. Join me for the next Genealogy Lab as we explore vital records, birth, marriage, and death. Stay curious. This is Diana Chrisman Smith, and I'll see you from my lab next time.
You've been inside the Genealogy Lab with Diana Chrisman Smith, where every clue, every record, and every story brings us one step closer to knowing who we are. Stay curious and stay tuned for more from Preservation Oaks.
And now, back to Preservation Oaks.
Welcome back to Preservation Oaks. I'm Sean Radcliff, and a huge thanks to Diana Chrisman Smith for dropping those census record gems on us today. Diana, you're basically teaching us to think like detectives collecting evidence and not just blindly following a checklist, and that's exactly why your guidance hits different. Anyone can show someone where to click, but you're out here rewiring how we actually think about research. That's next level genealogy, and that's why we keep coming back for more. I'll catch you next time from your lab. Thank you. We're here today with John Dichtl from the American Association for State and Local History. Let's pick up where we left off. Welcome back, John.
Great to be here.
John, can you talk about professional development opportunities? You just mentioned that before the break. You've got conferences and training programs.
Yeah, we do. And we use the word professional a lot here, and it certainly applies to the thousands of members who have college degrees or advanced degrees in museum studies or history and related fields. They think of themselves as professionals. But sometimes we get the question, well, what about volunteers and volunteer staff in all volunteer organizations or just volunteers at larger history institutions that have volunteers? We don't necessarily think of ourselves as professionals. We're just, this is a side. This is something we do as volunteers because we're retired from a different career, or I never had training in history, or I never had training in museum work. And, we use the word professional anyway, because we think the work that everyone in the field of public history and historical societies, all of their work is professional or should be professional. And can always be improved and sharpened. And sometimes we know the answer of how to do that. And as I said before, in every case, our members know the answer. Someone somewhere in the membership has a great suggestion, great advice to give. And so we see ourselves as just trying to share all that professional information just to help everyone do their work better. And then we also just learn from the people taking our professional development, the questions they bring, the experiences they have, and the things that they're doing in their institution. Sometimes we realize that that's really a great way that they figured that out, and we work that back into our professional development. So I just wanted to kind of say that about professional development from the beginning so that it's not off-putting. It really does include everyone who wants to do this work. So I think your question was about what does it look like? What kind of professional development trainings do we offer?
Yeah.
We do a big national conference every September. This year we'll be in Providence, Rhode Island in 2026. Then we'll be in Madison, Wisconsin in 27 and Albuquerque, New Mexico in 2028. We do lots of events, virtual and on-site in-person events. We just wrapped up a collections camp for textiles, and it was a 2-day workshop in Hartford, Connecticut, where participants really learned all the ins and outs of caring for different kinds of clothing and textiles. Really can be complex and arcane if you're looking at it from the outside, but what I heard reports from the workshop is that people just had a fantastic time. They really enjoyed it, learned a lot, and are taking all that information back with them to their institutions, and we'll probably share it with other institutions in their community. So we do workshops, on-site workshops like that, lots of webinars, lots of online courses. We do virtual workshops as well, things like basics of archives, basics of fundraising, designing history walking tours. Those are some of the workshops coming up. Also a NAGPRA essential, so the Native American graves preservation and restoration, repatriation. So virtual workshops, online courses, financial management, again, project management, caring for museum collections, developing exhibitions. We're in the middle of creating a historic house museum certificate series of courses so that someone finishing that series of courses will get a certificate declaring them a historic house museum pro, which is our second pro series. We have one that's been long running for the basics of archives. And then we just do a wide variety of webinars on all kinds of topics. We just did one on creating a staff safety plan, how to keep your staff safe in all kinds of situations. Have a webinar coming up on creating great working boards. Lots of different professional development.
I know I'm just amazed by the things you do and the things that I see on your website. You're just helping the community so much. I also was amazed at the number of publications and research papers and so on that you guys produce. How do those resources help organizations improve their work?
Well, we hope they help in just the very basic way of having a go-to resource where whether you actually have it in your hands or have downloaded it, or you know that it's on our website and you can come find it at any time, that people are consulting it. And then most of these publications that we have been worked into our professional development experiences. They're all related. Sometimes it's the same person who wrote the technical leaflet for, a topic is the person who is the instructor in the course. So that there's a lot of back and forth between our publications and the professional development trainings that we do. And then much of it is also tied to our STEPS program. So we try to ensure that there are kind of introductory level publications, kind of intermediate level, and then advanced level as well. And we do the same with our professional development. So it's all scaled that way, tiered that way. And we hear from people that they find it very useful.
Great. For a small historical society listening today, what would you say is the biggest reason to join?
I think the biggest reason to join is to be part of this vibrant network, this vibrant community of practitioners all across the country doing exactly what you're doing, dealing with some of the same challenges and same opportunities. and just being in that living network and hearing. I mean, it's far too much information to take in all at once, or to sit at a website by yourself and trying to absorb and read everything. It's just too much. So those resources are there, and you can always consult the website and consult those printed resources and sign up for professional development training when it's needed. But just being part of that living, breathing network throughout the year, hearing about, advances over in this part of the field, hearing about an experience over there, because you never know when you're going to need a piece of information. Someone might be talking about a great program that brought veterans in their communities together with high school students to do some really interesting project, but it wasn't necessarily interesting to you or meaningful to you when you first heard it, because you were busy working on something else. But then 6 months later, you remember that someone was talking about it, and you're part of this network, then you can go find it again. So we find that people benefit from that kind of living, breathing, sharing community that we represent.
Yeah, I think it's really great. Now, AASLH has led some major initiatives over the years, including programs like STEPS, which you just mentioned a while ago, and national reports. What are some current initiatives you're most excited about?
Yeah, let me say something about STEPS. STEPS is our Standards and Excellence program for history organizations, and it was created about 15 years ago. We've had something like 1,500 institutions participate in it, and it's a self-guided, self-assessment engagement with best practices in the field. So it's the STEPS it's a workbook, a thick workbook that breaks down the components of historical administration and running a museum or a historical society into 6 core areas, and then takes you into detail in each of those areas. And there's a way for using the workbook to kind of do a self-assessment and figure out where your organization is at. Is it doing okay? Is it doing better? Or is it already on to the kind of best level of work? And it's all structured. There are boxes to check, documents to compare against what you're doing. And so it's a wonderful program by itself that people can sign up for. You have to pay to participate in it. We try and keep the cost relatively low, and it's just a one-time fee. We also have helped history institutions go through it together with other history institutions, often in their state or in their area, so they can kind of hold each other mutually accountable. But then we've also made STEPS the underlying structure to all of our professional development. So any of the courses, webinars, or workshops that we offer are connected back to STEPS and refer to the components of STEPS that they help you meet as an organization. So
that's cool.
So you can kind of measure your progress, see how you're doing. And for someone, even if you decide not to go through STEPS, simply just seeing the STEPS structure laid out, it helps you understand everything that one ought to care about or know about, even if you choose not to work on it, or you have some other reason that your institution's probably doing okay in that area. It's just helpful to know what you might be missing. So STEPS is something we're always working on, always remain excited about STEPS. But your question, I think, was about what are our new initiatives. So 2 of those, one is Speak Up for History, which is an initiative to help history practitioners and organizations to speak up for themselves, to advocate for themselves more effectively, and really starting with that very locally. So how do you talk to your mayor's office? How do you talk to city council? How do you talk to local businesses, other stakeholders in your community, and then maybe even take that to the state legislature? How do you advocate for yourself, and by doing that also for thousands of other small organizations that are so strapped for time, money, staff, and resources? So that's going to be a printed guide that comes out. It'll be available for free, probably at the end of this month, end of July, early August. And then a really big initiative that we're stepping into as we get to the end of the 250th commemoration here in the next few months. It'll all peak in July and be continuing for the rest of 2026. But the next big initiative for AASLH is History and Democracy Initiative. So it's the idea that what can we learn from commemorating the 250th and how can we use that to improve the country and improve our communities and improve our history institutions. And so that's our History and Democracy Initiative. It's taking lessons like realizing how important civics are and a civic understanding of how government works, really realizing that a lot of Americans could use some help with that, and history institutions are the perfect places for them to get that information. But also history institutions do democracy work and civic work all the time without even calling it that. So helping history institutions to see that they're already doing this very important work of sustaining democracy in this republic in which we live, simply by preserving memory, which, by preserving memory in history, you keep leaders in government accountable, reminding people of how things used to be and how things were figured out, what policies worked, what policies didn't. That's all part of keeping a democracy and our democratic leaders accountable. History organizations also teach people critical thinking skills, showing how they use evidence and research to back up the interpretation that they're doing. That is also important in this society that seems so starved of information literacy. Like, everyone could become more information literate. And I think history organizations do a great job of that in their exhibits and in their programming. And so trying to bring all that to bear on where we are as a country and the kind of, rebuilding of the structures of democracy in this country and trust in institutions. I think history museums have a lot to say there.
Boy, I think those are wonderful initiatives. Good luck on those. I think
Thank
those
you.
are great. In fact, I've got some questions coming up about the History and Democracy Initiative. Before I get there, though, how did AASLH help organizations prepare for major milestones like America's 250th anniversary?
Yeah, well, we were kind of early adopters 10 years ago, right as the commission was being formed, the U.S. Semi-Quincentennial Commission. Even before that, we were starting to tell our members, first of all, asking our members, is anyone planning anything? What do you know? And then realizing that very few people were thinking 10 years ahead.
Yeah.
So we started pushing that, making sure that it was a constant thread of conversation, mainly wanting to make sure that someone somewhere was providing resources and guidance, and then kind of learned as we went that we were one of the few. So one of the great things I think that we did that was really helpful is we got together a group of renowned American historians, people in colleges and universities, but also people working at some of the best museums and historic sites in the country, and got them together and had conversations about what are the historical themes that Americans should be thinking about for the 250th. And we boiled all that down into this wonderful field guide for American history that came out. We published it about 5 years ago, and it had 5 major themes in it that were distilled from those conversations with all those wonderful thinkers and thought leaders. And we just kept repeating those themes and sharing those themes. And we found that many of the state commissions that were formed in the different states to plan heard about our themes and used them and maybe built off them. And we were just hoping that it would be a structure that people could use, or they could adapt, or they might reject it, but it would prod them into making their own thematic structures. And that certainly happened. So then we offered lots of workshops and had conversations at conferences as well. And then just throughout the whole 250th have tried to maintain the idea that it's really going to be a grassroots commemoration. There's so little that we can count on the federal government to do these days in kind of a unifying, holistic way. And the states are going to do a much better job of it. And I think that's been proven true. And most of the states have wonderful plans that are unfolding, and certainly thousands of historical institutions and communities around the country have their own plans. And I think that's really where most people are going to experience this 250th, is in their own communities.
Yeah, I agree. And I heard from 2 organizations that are your members how wonderful your help was and all of the guidance that you guys gave. So thank you very much for that.
Oh, it's great to hear.
What role does research and data play in shaping the future of the history field, do you think?
Well, we'd like it to play a bigger role. So we're always trying to find resources and time to do more research. And I don't mean historical research, because there are plenty of wonderful scholars and individuals, whether they're at a college or university or a research institute, or just someone who's passionate about history and knows a lot and doing it at home. There's plenty of research coming out. The research that I'm talking about is research about the field of public history and the field of museums. What are our challenges that are coming up? How many people are actually working in the field? How are they trained? What resources do they need? How can we, all of that research helps us do our work better as an association and helps our members do their work better. So just collecting that data. So we started, before the pandemic, we started a national visitation report each year. And now we've moved it to do it every 2 or 3 years instead. But it was to try and track how successful organizations of all different kinds history organizations were in attracting visitors, and tracking that number year to year or over several years. And I'm really glad we started before COVID, because now we have a baseline number to go back to. And same for the 250th. We wanted to be able to see, what kind of effect the semi-quincentennial is going to have on history institutions' visitorship. And we have those numbers now going back to well before. I think we started this in 2019. So we do that kind of research as well.
That's really great. Really great. So helpful. Thank you for that. Now, you mentioned the History and Democracy Initiative, and I'd like to ask you, what prompted AASLH to launch this effort now?
2 things. One is just the sense that democracy is being challenged around the world, being challenged in this country as well. Just, seeing, you can measure it lots of different ways, and there are lots of surveys, a bunch of them out recently, kind of tied to the 250th, that show declining levels of patriotism, but also declining levels of interest in democracy, or really even in belief that it is the best form of government for this country or any country. So that's really hard to see. But it's not, it's not just me saying it. I think there's lots of metrics showing that institutions and functions and faith in democracy are really being challenged and threatened. So that was the first piece. And then the second was the timing now is, not just because it's a critical need, because it's under threat, but because here we are at this 250th special moment. We're supposed to be commemorating the world's longest running democracy. And so there's more interest in having conversations. I think there's more of a general public appetite to have conversations about different forms of government or different ways to vote. Do we have to have a 2-party system? Could there be more than 2 parties?
Right.
Like all of those questions, even people looking at over the next 11 years, as we start, in 11 years, we'll be at the 250th anniversary of the Constitution. And so there's going to be lots of conversations about, the Bill of Rights. Do we have, is everything covered in the Bill of Rights, or do we need some amendments to make our democracy stronger and better? So that's the other reason, is this kind of anniversary moment, the critical need, and this anniversary moment.
Fantastic. Thank you. The History and Democracy Initiative suggests that history organizations are an untapped partner in strengthening democracy. What does that mean?
Well, I think, as I was saying earlier about history and democracy, there's a lot of contributions and work that history museums and historical societies are already doing that we would count as supporting democracy. So things like preserving memory, preserving the historical record, helping people in a community feel like they belong to something and belong to that community, and that community is special. All of that fosters, interest in things like voting and improving things in your society. So there's that sense that museums and historical societies might be an untapped partner themselves, like realizing, oh, we have a stake in this, we have a role in this, we're already doing this, and we could do more. We could become a polling site. There are museums and historic sites that offer themselves as places for naturalization ceremonies for new citizens. There's all kinds of kind of very intentional civic and democracy building work that history museums could do that they're not doing now. So they're untapped in that way. But then it's also thinking about the kinds of institutions and organizations that do a lot of civic work that could use help from the local history museum or historical society that maybe don't have those relationships yet and haven't asked for those relationships yet, but your organization could be the one who steps up and offers that help.
Right. Thank you, John. The initiative focuses on things like critical thinking, connecting past and present, like you mentioned, and civic participation. Why are those skills so important today?
Well, information literacy, people's ability to deal with vast amounts of information, data that's coming at them, and opinions and things in writing on the internet, things they see in their news feeds and social media. It's just, it can be overwhelming. And this initiative focuses on critical thinking and being able to deal with all that information and being able to understand where information might be starting from, whether it's backed up by evidence, whether there's a bias to it. If that bias, everything has a bias. Everything has a bias.
Right.
So that's not a reason to discount it, but you want to be aware of it and you want to try and bring some balance sometimes. But it's because something has bias to it doesn't mean it's not worthwhile or it's not accurate. So, we want a focus on critical thinking because we know that so much of the work that history organizations do in preparing materials, preparing exhibits, preparing publications involves that critical thinking. So there are people in those history institutions, volunteers and paid staff alike, who bring that critical thinking to their communities and to conversations in their communities, but also model that behavior, model that kind of critical thinking for others. And then simply visitors and users who come to the historical society or the history museum also exercise their own critical thinking as they're kind of absorbing that history and thinking about it. So all of that is important today because it seems like it's getting increasingly hard to know what's fact and fiction, what's coming at you. And, with AI, artificial intelligence generating images, generating videos, and even articles, I'm convinced that about half to 3/4 of what I read in text on the internet is, generated by AI.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Now, this initiative has 3 core goals. Can you walk us through those goals of inspiration, guidance, and connection, and what they look like in action?
I think what they look like in action is still to be determined. We're still at the beginning of this initiative and trying to get through this kind of peak month of the 250th before we fully turn to it. But those 3 parts, so inspiration is really the idea of being inspired by examples that others are doing, other history sites are doing, that reinforce democracy. So being inspired by the work that others do and their experiences. And so we see our role as sharing those examples and highlighting them and, maybe doing some curatorial work there and bringing great examples together to inspire other people. The guidance comes when we get to the point of being able to break down what is successful into its constituent parts. Like, it really, it can really help get, young people or older people, whatever the group is that you're trying to work with, to think about the institutions of democracy in your community and in the country if you do A, B, and C. So breaking it down into those pieces and then helping people see how those fit together. And then connection is that the third part is just remembering, as I said about our organization, that we're really a constellation of stars, of lots of, thousands of individuals, thousands of organizations. And this is not just a, show up and do your shopping and then leave. It's much more of a community effort, a community of history organizations across the country. And so we want them to stay connected to each other. So, they're inspired, they see great examples, gets them excited to do this work. They get actual guidance on what is working, what is getting the messages across, and then they're staying connected to share what they're learning and to continue that kind of circular movement through inspiration, guidance, and connection.
Wow. Amazing, John. What a great initiative. I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's time for us to take a break for a few minutes.
Okay.
Listeners, we'll be right back after an important message about the amazing number of resources that AASLH has to offer to history-focused organizations across the United States to help them succeed.
Every community has a story worth preserving. But preserving history takes more than good intentions. It takes knowledge, training, leadership, and access to the right resources. That's where the American Association for State and Local History, AASLH, can help. For decades, AASLH has supported museums, historical societies, archives, preservation organizations, educators, and volunteers across America through professional development opportunities designed to strengthen the work of preserving our shared heritage. Looking to build leadership skills? Explore the nationally recognized History Leadership Institute, where emerging and established leaders gain valuable insights and practical tools for guiding history organizations into the future. Want to connect with colleagues from across the country? Attend the AASLH Annual Conference, where professionals and volunteers gather to exchange ideas, share successes, discuss challenges, and learn from one another. Need training on a specific topic? AASLH offers webinars, online courses, workshops, publications, and educational resources covering everything from collections care and interpretation to governance, fundraising, community engagement, and organizational management. Whether you're part of a large museum, a small-town historical society, a local archive, a genealogical society, or a volunteer preservation group, AASLH provides resources designed to help your organization thrive.
I almost forgot to tell you all about a very special event coming up. On August 8th from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m., President Bobby Mathis and the Union City Society for Historic Preservation, located at 210 Charlotte Street in Union City, Michigan, will be hosting Stories from the Stoop, a wonderful live storytelling event. Admission is absolutely free. And there's more. If you've been thinking about becoming a member, they'll be hosting a special new member reception at 1 p.m. before the event begins. So come out, have some fun, hear some amazing stories, meet fellow history lovers, and support the important work of the Union City Society for Historic Preservation. This should be a great time. Have fun, everybody. Hey, this is Sean Radcliff with a personal message. I'm not sponsored by St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. I just believe in the dignity, beauty, and compassion of what they're doing every day to help struggling families all across America. Imagine a child diagnosed with cancer, and their family never receives a single bill for treatment, travel, housing, or food. That's the reality at St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. Since 1962, St. Jude has been on a mission to advance cures and prevention for pediatric catastrophic diseases through groundbreaking research and compassionate care. No child is turned away because of race, religion, or their family's ability to pay. Thanks to donors like you, they've helped raise the overall childhood cancer survival rate in the United States from just 20% to more than 80% today. For acute lymphoblastic leukemia, survival has climbed from 4% to 94% due to their research. and they're sharing these life-saving advances with the world, working to lift global survival rates from 20% to 60% by 2030. Every donation fuels research breakthroughs, cutting-edge treatments, and total family support, so parents can focus on what matters most, their child's fight for survival. 82 cents of every dollar goes directly to patient care, research, and future needs. Your support saves lives today and builds hope for tomorrow. Please join the fight. Donate today at stjude.org, because no child should die in the dawn of their life. St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. They're finding cures and they're saving children. Thank you very much. It means a lot to me.
And now, back to the program.
Welcome back to Preservation Oaks. I'm your host, Sean Radcliff, and we're here today with John Dichtl from the American Association for State and Local History. I'm learning a lot, John. I want to thank you and welcome back.
Yeah, great to be here, Sean.
John, what kinds of programming or resources can organizations expect from this initiative?
Well, I think a lot of the programs and resources are going to be very similar to the kinds of resources that we have always. We'll have webinars, we will have courses, we will have workshops. There will be components of our annual conference. We'll do special mini conferences or symposiums as well online. So it'll be, the format will be familiar, or at least to those who've seen our materials. So we're not inventing anything new in terms of format. The subject matter will be different. It'll be focused on history and democracy, and we'll bring, we hope, a wider and wider variety of partners into those formats and into that programming with us. And I think that's what's going to make it particularly exciting and interesting.
Who are you hoping to collaborate with, and why is that important?
Yeah, I think it's important because I think one of the big lessons we've learned from the planning for the 250th and seeing so much interest in, it's not just history organizations and historians planning for the 250th. It's all kinds of community leaders and national leaders and corporations and educational groups. There's, an air of entertainment to it as well. So we've been kind of rubbing elbows with lots of different partners in that regard.
Right.
And then also with things like civics. And through my entire 30-some year career, civics was always seen as something separate and distinct from the work of history organizations. And certainly there were some history organizations that did some aspect of civics, but most history organizations probably didn't think that way. And certainly what we're trying to do with this history and democracy initiative is really erase the boundaries and recognize that it's important work that we all need to be doing all the time. And so that means that we will be working with a wide variety of partners, so people and institutions in the fields of journalism and media, for instance. There's a whole kind of sub-community or community of civics organizations, foundations, philanthropies that help fund that work, and then institutes at universities that promote civics, think tanks, private nonprofits that do that work. And as I said, that has long been kind of separate and distinct from most history organizations. And we're excited about connecting to many more of those potential partners.
I really think the History and Democracy Initiative is so vital today. How do you measure success for something like this? What does impact look like 5 years from now?
I think the marker of success will be 5 years from now or more, how this feels, if it still feels like a vital, relevant thing to be doing. I guess that will tell us if we know if we've been successful. And I can remember maybe 10 years ago, about 10 years ago, a little more than that, 10, 11, 12 years ago, there was something called the History Relevance Initiative, or History Relevance Campaign, and then it became the History Relevance Initiative that I was part of with a kind of a small core group of people from a bunch of different history organizations. And back then, 10 years ago, we felt that the field of history organizations of public history was really struggling for a sense of relevance, that we were being challenged and beat out in conversations by STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math.
Right, yeah.
We were seeing school curricula change, kind of shifting to emphasize STEM, often at the expense of history and social studies. And so a group of us that was small, but that became many people, and then eventually hundreds of organizations united in this history relevance campaign, just argued simply that we should state openly that history is relevant, that it's important, and here are all the different ways that it's relevant. Well, fast forward through, a lot of the debate and disruption of the last decade, Black Lives Matter, challenging, views of the lost cause and Confederacy, neo-Confederacy, Me Too movement, partisan politics going on. And suddenly history is, and even without the 250th, history has become so incredibly relevant. Here, newscasters, podcasters, CNN, CBS, ABC, all the major news networks, they have historians on, they're thinking about history. And some of it is because of the 250th, but much more of it happened because in the last 10 years, history suddenly feels so relevant. So I don't think any of us could have predicted that 10 years ago. And so I take that long digression just to kind of answer your question. I think 5 or 10 years from now, we'll know if this History and Democracy Initiative was successful, if it had an impact, and maybe it will disappear because it will have been so successful. It will just have been absorbed into everything that we do and we won't have to even call it that.
I'm so glad you took the time to answer that thoughtfully. I really am. I appreciate it very much. I think that news organizations are bringing more historians on because children and adults even don't have a background in history anymore as much. I was talking to one state, and I won't mention the state because I don't want to embarrass anybody, but I was talking to an educator there who said, we don't even teach history in elementary school any longer because nobody can agree on what the right history is to teach the children.
Wow.
And I was shocked. I was like, really? You don't even teach it? No, we do not.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay. That is wild.
I think I understand why they might have said that, but I think it's dead wrong. I think there are lots of national studies that show from different directions that show the same thing, that the vast majority of Americans, whether they're Democrat or Republican or independent, the vast majority, 80% or more, believe in kind of this common ground that they want children to learn the good and the bad, the difficult and, the fun and the exciting and, the inspiring, but also the difficult, troubled parts of our past. They want them to learn it all. And it's only there's a fringe group on the far left and on the far right that get all the attention and make people think that all of history is being taught one way or the other. But the truth is schools do an excellent job. Schools are doing a fantastic job of delivering a complex, full story of America that is both inspiring, but also shows there's a lot of places where we've gone wrong and people have had to struggle, and they continue to struggle today to make this country better. And we're not done yet. So
I always say history is messy.
It is messy.
Now, John, for a small town historical society listening today, how can they realistically participate in this initiative?
Yeah, well, we're just getting started, but eventually I think our website will be, there's some information there that they can go look at, kind of find their own handholds to grab onto, but we'll have more and more there as the months go on in 2026. I also think it might be worth looking at kind of as a, related effort, also inspiring. Go look at the American Press Institute, the API. American Press Institute. It's a wonderful organization. We've started to partner with them on some small things, but they're very interested in how local history organizations can work with local media, with local press for mutual benefit. And they've got some great short articles, blog posts about how that can be done. So I think that's another way that every one of your listeners could benefit, and doing things like simply approaching your local news organization or regional news organization, if you have one of those, about how your history organization could work to, supply information, create a column, a regular column or something, or do a deep dive into your archives or collection on the anniversary, some kind of important anniversary in the nation or your state or your community, and do that with local press, local media, because they're hungry. These places, as your listeners I'm sure know, local media is just really suffering in most places. There's become financially very difficult. So anything that a history organization can do to provide really solid, well-researched information, that's going to be naturally interesting to people in that community because it's about their community. That's a great place to start as well.
John, what gives you hope about the future of history organizations in this country?
Well, back at the beginning of our conversation, we talked about just the large number. I think I said more than 21,000 history organizations. It's in every corner of the country. Often the history organization is, there's not even necessarily a branch of the public library, but there'll be a historical society. So it's so far reaching. And I think as more and more sectors of our society, journalists, politicians, foundations, philanthropies really understand that, I think they're going to value history organizations even more. And that's some of the work that we're trying to do, is share with our colleagues in lots of different sectors, where power and money lie, that, you have incredible resources and friends in these small local history organizations.
Yeah.
So that gives me hope. And then also, just back to the beginning of our conversation, we talked about how so many different kinds of people get involved in state and local history, in this public history work, and they come from so many different kinds of backgrounds. Maybe they got into it because they were taking care of a local cemetery, or they were part of a church that has a building with a deep, rich history, and they started to offer tours, and that got them interested in, their local history museum. Or, they're a retired government official that brought some expertise to the board, or a retired lawyer brought expertise to the board. But, people come from so many different backgrounds, and that just gives me incredible hope. It's just this limitless resource of people who are passionate. And I don't think there's anything else like it. Just so many people come to history. And I didn't even touch on the historical interests that people have. People might be interested in the Civil War, or that their grandparents or their parents, what did they do on the home front during World War II, or, the history of, as I said, some church in their community, or some building, or, the waves of immigrants that have come to their community. There's just so much richness that brings people to this public history work. So that always gives me hope.
That's why I include genealogical societies in this podcast, because it's all about history.
Absolutely. Almost every museum historian or public historian that I know, when they retire, they become a genealogist. That's when they start looking into their own family history.
Thanks for that. Now, John, if you could give one message to every local historical society in America, what would it be?
Well, I think that message would be a message of hope, and, keep doing what you're doing, reach out to allies, and, find those young people in your community, give them responsibilities, depend on them, and they will connect and serve your organization. They need to be invited in. So I think it would just be a message of hope and connecting to the next generations.
Thank you for that. Now, I'd like to provide listeners with the contact information for AASLH one more time. The website is aaslh.org. The phone is 320-3203. You can email AASLH at Dichtl, DICHTL, at AASLH.org. Their address is 404 BNA Drive, Suite 105, Nashville, Tennessee 37217. And you can find them on Facebook if you just search for AASLH. John, for our listeners around the world, why should they care about local history, not just where they live, but everywhere?
Well, local history makes the world interesting. It's when you go visit another community, whether it's in your state or somewhere else in this country or in another country, the thing that makes it interesting is probably how it's different than where you live. And it's those differences that are preserved in local history. So I think that's the basic reason. It's, local history, like the natural environment, is what makes a place worth living and what makes it special and different from other places.
Thank you for that. How can the public support AASLH and local history organizations?
First of all, by being an advocate for history and history organizations, telling other people about how interesting, how exciting local history is, state history is. So speaking up for it kind of in those informal settings, but also, I guess in public community settings, in local government, state government, being an advocate if you can. And then certainly being a financial contributor, whether that's visiting and paying a fee to visit a museum or historical society, or joining and being an active member, and or making donations. Those are so critical, so critical.
Thank you for that. John, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. It's been so enlightening to hear all that you and your organization do for the state and local history community. This conversation has truly been a pleasure, and I really mean that, and I'm so glad we got to connect.
Yeah, well, thank you, Sean. I really appreciate you reaching out, and I just really want to applaud your work as well. I think we're kind of working in a similar direction here, and just listening to some of your episodes, it just makes me realize how much richer and deeper this field is than I see on a daily basis. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. And with that, we'll end our time with our guest, John Dichtl from AASLH.org. Listeners, please stay tuned for my comments and wrap-up, which is coming up next. Oh my, isn't AASLH a great American organization? I want to encourage you all to consider joining. Membership rates are very reasonable, and wow, the benefits are off the charts. As we wrap today's show, I want to leave you with something important. There are people in this world who receive gifts of wisdom and leadership and quietly devote their lives to service without ever seeking the spotlight. Our guest today, John Dichtl of the American Association for State and Local History, is one of them. After more than 3 decades as a leader in the public history field, John isn't just an administrator. He's a collaborator, a teacher, a strategist, and above all, a listener. His philosophy is elegantly simple. Find what works, share it, help others succeed. And succeed they do. Behind thousands of local museums, historical society, and archives stands AASLH, providing education, professional development, research, standards, and advocacy. From national conferences to online courses to their respected STEPS certification program, they're equipping history organizations with tools to thrive, even on modest budgets. They have a fair and value-added membership cost. What struck me most was John's respect for volunteers. He never drew a line between professionals and amateurs. Professionalism, he reminded us, isn't always a degree. It's demonstrated through the quality of work and passion for learning. Whether you're cataloging photographs, leading museum tours, or serving on a board, your work matters. John also spoke honestly about the challenges: funding struggles, aging volunteers, disappearing local newspapers, and buildings requiring care that communities can't always afford. But he left me with a powerful warning. If we fail to preserve local history, it doesn't fade. It disappears forever. Once an oral history goes unrecorded, once photographs are lost, once a building comes down, that story is gone. Yet John remains hopeful. History organizations, he said, help people belong. They don't just preserve yesterday. They welcome today's residents into an ongoing community story. And with initiatives like Speak Up for History, teaching organizations to advocate for their value, and the new History and Democracy Initiative, strengthening civic engagement through evidence-based learning, AASLH is ensuring that story continues. His advice for the future? Find young people. Invite them. Trust them. Give them meaningful work. Let them become part of the story. If today's conversation moved you, visit AASLH.org. Whether you're a volunteer, professional, educator, or simply love local history, you'll find resources waiting. Call them at 615-320-3203 or email John directly at Dichtl, D-I-C-H-T-L, @AASLH.org. John, I'd like to thank you again for your time, your wisdom, and for dedicating your career to preserving America's story. People across America will feel your legacy every time they walk through a museum door or discover something new about their home at the local historical society or genealogical society. And to our listeners, remember this: history doesn't preserve itself, people do. When we preserve the past, we preserve identity, memory, and the wisdom that guides generations yet to come. So thank you all for joining me on another episode of Preservation Oaks. If questions occur to you and you'd like more information, please connect with AASLH via the contact information provided. I hope this information helps the audience understand how valuable AASLH is to the community and what kinds of excellent services they have to offer. The American Association for State and Local History is truly one of our nation's preservation oaks. All right, that's a wrap for this episode. Music used today is from Cymbalbird, the 126ers, Nefex, No Filter, the Mini Vandals, Thunder, RKVC, and Track Tribe. Hey, this is Sean Radcliff. See you all next time on Preservation Oaks. And until then, keep on giving and keep on living the good life.
You can visit at www.microstreamradio.com. This broadcast is owned and copyrighted by Microstream Radio. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, reproduced, copied, or used anywhere without the written permission of Microstream Radio. Preservation Oaks starring Sean Radcliff originates in Salt Lake City, Utah. Be sure to join us for our next episode on your favorite podcast platform. This is Thaddeus Dillon speaking. Preservation Oaks has come to you through the worldwide podcast platform Podbean, and our home is preservationoaks.podbean.com. Hopefully you found today's episode useful, informative, and thought-provoking. If so, please like, follow, comment, and/or subscribe. Remember that being free means being free to be curious, and that historical and genealogical societies and museums allow us to discover the past, be free to explore, where curiosity opens every door. Thanks to everyone for listening. Stay cozy, curious, and keep exploring the incredible stories that shape our world. Remember to cherish and support the preservation of history in your own communities. The content of this program is provided for educational and informational purposes only. Some material included in this program may be copyrighted by third parties. However, under Section 107 of the U.S. Copyright Act, the doctrine of fair use
allows the limited use of copyrighted material without requiring permission from the rights holders when used for purposes such as education, criticism, commentary, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. These uses are legally permitted even if they might otherwise constitute infringement. If you wish to use copyrighted material from this program for purposes beyond fair use, you must obtain permission from the copyright owner. If you believe your copyrighted material has been used in this program in a way that does not qualify as fair use, please contact us at preservationoaks@gmail.com.